Just welcome. So glad you all are here today for our Tales of Transformation. And just want to welcome you to the Sophisticated Planners, Create Sophisticated Learners, Deeper Learning at Pikeville Independent. And so thankful to have Ms. Sarah Blackburn and Brian Hobbs here working with us and presenting the great things going on in Pikeville Independent. So you guys take it away.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So Sarah and I were, at Pikeville now, we're digital learning coaches, but during the last school year, we were also deeper learning coaches, thanks to KVEC and the thoughtful classroom. And so we wanted to talk to you guys today about some of the tools that we used last year to sort of find that success with our learners and sort of start the process. And the metaphor that Sarah came up with that works so well for this was that we're sort of like planting a garden. So, when you plant a garden, there are certain steps that you kind of have to follow to make sure your garden grows, and deeper learning is no different there. So, our review for the day, we're going to be talking about picking up the tools. So our classroom deeper learning experiences, sort of what we saw go on in our own classroom and what we use to make those things happen. Sowing the seeds, so how we actually went about sharing deeper learning in our district and showing the tools to our coworkers and things like that. And also watering the garden. So looking forward, our action research focus for the 23-24 school year, which is rapidly approaching. When we talk about choosing the right tools, it's really important to remember that, the tools that you choose to use are personalized to your classroom, to your department, and even school-wide. And, you're going to use data to make sure you're informing your choices correctly. So, you have the 4 cornerstones there, and obviously you're going to want to pick the ones that you feel like you need to focus on the most. So what you'll see today is that we have a kind of a nice spread of talking about the tools that hit the 4 cornerstones and how we went about deciding that those are the ones we're going to focus on. So in 2022, Edwig did a study, and what they found was that teachers spend an average of 5 hours per week just on planning and preparation alone for instruction. And so one of the beautiful things about the deeper learning tools is that they can help maximize that time and make it effective, which, as educators, we're always striving to do. It's a really important thing. And, personally, for my classroom, the deeper learning tools that I put into place, and Sarah, I'm sure you're no different there, made a huge difference. And even in some ways that I would not have expected, these tools helped me find a lot of success with kids that I had been struggling with a little bit this year. So they're wildly important.
Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time going through some of these thoughtful classroom tools that we use for deeper learning in our district. And I just want to go ahead on a little side note that actually this is our first year as digital learning coaches. We each had taught for about 10 years each, Mr. Hobbs in high school English language arts and myself in middle school and high school science. And so this upcoming year will be our first year out of the classroom as digital learning coaches. So these tools that we're talking about, we actually did implement in the classroom as teachers. And so the first one I want to talk about is a planning tool that can help you create authentic learning experiences for your students. And it is one of the thoughtful classroom tools that we use for deeper learning at our school. So it's called the learning window. And so I just wanted to go ahead and show you an example of a science standard. I lived in middle school science for the past 9 years. And so this is a standard that we teach in 6th grade science in Kentucky. And if you have any experience with the science standards, you know that they can be kind of hairy when you go and look and plan. And so you got the performance expectations, you've got your science and engineering practices, DCI and CCCs and all of that together. And, I've done this for a while, and every year when I go back to do my curriculum map, I would still look at these standards and be like, okay, how can I do this with fidelity? How can I give students learning experiences? How can I get them to that performance expectation in the best way? Well, the learning window has been a perfect tool for deconstructing these standards and looking for opportunities for deeper learning. And so I want you to look at that standard, and I'll show you how I used the learning window tool with this particular standard. So the performance expectation, or what we expect the students to be able to do by the end of this unit, would be to analyze and interpret data to determine scale properties of objects in the solar system. Something that's super broad, that can mean a lot of things. Of course, I'm going to look in my DCI to see what it's going to take for them to do that and what skills they'll need in their SEPs and cost-cutting concepts. But the learning window is a deeper learning tool for planning that will allow you to take a standard like that and basically break it down into 4 areas. What will students need to know as you teach that? Terms, facts, formulas, the habits of mind you're going to try to foster, because we're teaching the whole student. And as we do deeper learning, I think that's so important that we don't forget some of these, what we call soft skills that students need to have. We're never going to get into deeper learning if we can't teach the whole child. So I love that the habits of mind are involved in this learning window, because that's something as teachers that we really need to explicitly look at and think about and teach with whatever content we're doing. Then you've got what will students need to understand. Those are those big overarching concepts that are going to be within that standard. And then what will students need to be able to do? These are the skills that they will have to do that. And then at the bottom, what terms will they need to know? And all this does is it gives you it's so simple, but the types of questions that are asked in the 4 panes of that learning window are really important for you as the teacher, being able to plan for learning experiences for your students. And so what this does is let you just break that standard down into the bare bones. And like, for example, the excuse me, for what students will need to know here for that particular standard, it would be how the solar system formed, inner and outer planets, the order of the planets, things like that. Things that when I look at that topic, I know, okay, here are the explicit things I'm going to have to teach. Down here, what will they need to be able to understand? Those are your broader concepts. And down here, I put our solar system is in the Milky Way galaxy, which is one of many. That is a bigger concept that I want them to really understand through those smaller things I'm teaching. And then what will they be able to do? Well, things like read for understanding. If they're going to be analyzing data, they'll have to be able to interpret diagrams, use models to explain things. And again, this is super simple, but all this does is, as a teacher, as you're planning for deeper learning experiences, it breaks these standards down into those skills and concepts that students need to know. This is I use this as soon as I learned about it for the rest of the year. And please, forgive my awful handwriting, but I mean, that shows that I used it, and I really did, and all the notes on it. And let me tell you, as I was planning, I would go back and add things in each of the panes. I would teach a lesson and be like, oh gosh, I need to add this to the learning window, or a student would ask questions. So it's just a tool that helps you be intentional and make sure that you are really teaching students for deeper learning instead of that surface level learning like we talked about earlier. And again, the vocabulary terms down there, that kept growing as I taught the unit. And this is going to be a super nice tool. Again, I'm not going to be in the classroom this next year, but I did give my learning windows to the teacher who ended up getting my position next year. And she's finding them very useful too in her planning for next year.
Along those same lines of thinking, learning window obviously can help you break that standard down into manageable chunks and make it much easier to work with. But I also liked it as a teacher, because it would allow me to sort of keep a roadmap in my own mind as I went about the lesson about where I needed to be going. And so even before I knew about Learning Window, I used to type up notes and be like, okay, make sure you do this and this. And then along comes Learning Window, and it just puts it into so much more of an organized, easier to understand format for me. And so that same thought process can actually be taken and given to the students, this is really the reason that I love Learning Window so very much. Is because if I have a class that is struggling to follow along with my lesson, one of the easiest ways that I can go about making sure that they're getting back on board with me, other than changing the instruction a little bit, is by offering them what you see here, whereas Learning Window has been transformed into a student side planning tool. So you can see that it goes from, what will they need to know to what will I need to know. So it's for the student to use as a checklist. And you can see here on this organizer, we actually have the boxes next to each of the what will I need to knows, where they can check it off. So when they get to what a linear equation is, if I know that as a student, as a learner, I can check that off and move on down to the next box. The habits of mind box, that one is one that's very near and dear to me as well. Because, obviously I want my students to have the content down and be really comfortable with it. But, personally, I really also want my students, especially as a literature teacher, because that's one of the beauties of literature, I want them to walk away from that book with a life lesson of some sort. And having those habits of mind that they're trying to develop be listed out for them, and they can look at that statement, they can look inward and say, okay, do I have that habit of mind down where I can persevere when faced with a challenging problem? If I think that I do, I can check it. And that's an accomplishment that I can see that I have checked there. So that habits of mind box being given to them and so they can look back on it is very, very important to me. And obviously the other boxes are important too, but I also want to speak to the terms that will be important for me to know and understand at the bottom. You know, in a classroom, you hear about word walls pretty often where you have your terms up on the wall for them to use. And those are wonderful, but it's also helpful if they can maybe have something slipped into the front of their binder or in their class notebook that they can kind of go back and look at. And so you can see in the bottom down there, they have those terms that they're going to need to know for this lesson right there in front of them. They can reflect on those. They can sort of self-identify the ones that they still might not know after a couple of days and maybe put a little more emphasis on those. There's a lot of different things you can do here that the Learning Window as a student-side planning tool really allows for. And that's why I loved it so much. So likewise, another one that this, if I had to pick a single tool that made the biggest difference in my classroom all year, Learning Window as a student-side tool was a huge one, but 7-step directions, this next one is it is the easiest to implement in my opinion, and it makes a difference day one with your students. So I'll tell you from a personal experience last year, I had a classroom and the class was an honors class. So that kind of surprised me a little bit. I was having some classroom management issues, and usually you don't get that on honors classes, but it's a little bit different. And so it wasn't so much behavior as it was that they were sort of distracted and like to talk about a lot of things. And one of the issues that I was having is I would give instructions and then I would go to step back to let the kids take over and start working. And then I'd have a hand up immediately and they would want those instructions repeated back to them. And it's because they were sort of distracted and talking to their friends or whatnot. And so 7-step directions we learned about it in the training. I walked out of that training the very next school day. I put 7-step directions into effect. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you I didn't have a single other issue out of that class around that topic the entire rest of the year. I went over it with the kids. You can see the organizer here. I explained how it worked. I set it in place. I walked away and let them work. I had a silent class for the last 20 minutes of the day while they were working. And for that particular class period, that was an absolute miracle. And so this is actually the organizer that I'm talking about right here. This is my organizer. They were in the middle of working with, I think it was with Mice and Men. So this is an organizer that's built around a novel study. And you can see up at the top up there, when I've got my what should they be doing? Answer the following in a paragraph, including textual evidence. So they have their, okay, well, how long does this need to be? Well, Mr. Hobbs doesn't have to tell me because it's a paragraph. It says it right on the board in front of me. Do I have to have textual evidence in this? That's one of the questions I like to ask, even though we work with that all year. Yeah, you do. It's on the board in front of you. So they have everything that they need for the assignment right here. Who does it? Everybody in the classroom should be doing it. Because, you know, when you do a novel study, sometimes you have moments where there's kids that haven't quite gotten as far and they need some wiggle room. But they know here, likely, I should be caught up. I should be doing this with everybody else. One of the things that I really like about 7-step directions is that it's very adaptable to your own classroom. And you'll see an example of that on the next slide. But you can see here on the how box right here, I've got a little bit of my own personality in there because that's what the kids sort of reacted to. But work on your own and quietly use your novels to go back through the text and identify evidence to support your opinion. And then on the bottom down there, what the help is, I can't help you form an opinion. You're good at that skill anyway, because they're really, really good at forming an opinion immediately. And they want to tell you their opinion. But then when you say, okay, what's your support for that? They don't always have that down yet. And that's the skill that we were kind of targeting. And so, you know, we had joked about that in the class before, and then here you have me actually stating it for them as well. I also want to point out the help box. One of the examples on the organizer within the thoughtful classroom that we looked at was ask 3 before me, which was something that I guess I'd kind of heard about it before, but had never really used it. But listen, that's another game changer, because in my help box here, I have asked for help only after you spent a significant amount of time looking for evidence on your own. So to the kids, that tells them that if they raise their hand after a minute and they say, hey, I don't know where in the book this is, my answer to that question is going to be, well, look at your organizer. You need to spend a significant amount of time. And it's sort of one of those things where if they have a significant amount of time that they have to look at it, that's not definite, So what's mostly going to happen is they're going to spend some time looking at that. They're going to think it's not been enough time. And they're going to keep looking until they actually find that before they actually raise their hand and ask for help. And if they do, they probably actually do need assistance from me. And so like, that's another huge, huge thing for me. Now this next organizer is one of Sarah's from a different grade level. And so that adaptability is really important to us.
Okay, so I'll talk about this for a second, and just to recap, 7-step directions is a thoughtful classroom tool that we use for deeper learning. And the reason why I think this fits with deeper learning is because our big goal is to create independent learners. And in order to work independently and be a good learner, you have to know what questions to ask when you're given an assignment. And this gives you a series of questions that can be applied to any assignment given in any grade level in any content area. And this is something that I really think that if we got lots of teachers in the district to use, it would really start showing gains with our students, because they're going to see these on the board. They're going to see, what questions do I need to ask when I'm given something to do. So this is one that I adapted for sixth grade engineering units. And again, it's all the same questions, but this is just more on their level. And just some differences, I won't go through this as in detail, but see, I have color coded it. And that is something that I kept in sixth grade, because what I would be able to do is just, if they raise their hand and ask a question real quick, I'd be like, look at the green one. Okay. Or, look at the blue one. And then they would see that. So I kept the colors consistent throughout the year as I used this. I also added check marks to it, so they knew these are the criteria I have to have as I work through this. Also, something that I wanted to point out here is that I also had down at the bottom, you should not finish early, because that's a lot of what do I do after I'm done? And that is just another thing that I would put on there, like, you should not finish early, because sometimes that's the answer. If you finished early, you've probably not done this correctly. And so I actually used this a whole lot toward the end of the school year, because we were working on a lot of project-based learning. This is a game changer for project-based learning, because you have students in different places working on different things, but you have these 7-step directions, and they can say, okay, if I'm done with this, this is what I go on to next. Or if I'm done early, maybe I shouldn't be done early. Okay. So the next tool that I want to talk about is more of an engagement tool. And this is just classic deeper learning. We're making connections. We are staying engaged. We are collaborating with others as we use this tool. And it's another one, all these deeper learning tools that we're talking about are so simple. And when you look at them, you're probably thinking, wow, that seems really easy. But when you see what happens in the classroom, you're going to see the types of learning that occur. So an association triangle is where you basically take 3 terms that you are teaching students, and they basically have to find out how these words are how the words are similar and how they are different, how they are related. Usually you might see this asked as, an open response question in a textbook, something like that. But what an association triangle does is it allows them to see these words visually, and it's a collaborative process as well. They're not just doing this on their own. So the topic that we were talking about in science this particular day was gravity and mass and weight. And I know Ms. Belcher's lived in middle school science forever, and there's a lot of misconceptions around that, aren't there? Students think that mass and weight are the exact same thing, okay? And it's really difficult to explain that to them, because we live in a place where our mass is going to be consistent because we have the same gravitational pull. And so this is something that I was trying to really make sure that my students understood. And it's hard to assess, do students really understand something well? Because later on that you might think that they've got it, they've answered these test questions right, and then a big misconception comes along across 2 weeks later, and you're like, oh goodness. But this really helps with that, and it ensures deeper learning. So what you do here's how you use it. You have your 3 terms, and here I had mass, gravity, and weight, because all 3 of those terms are very closely interrelated, not exactly the same, very often mistaken for each other. And so you put them in a triangle shape. And along the sides of the triangle, so as you can see up here, I hope you can see my cursor, like for example, between mass and gravity, students are going to write down the similarities between mass and gravity, not just similarities, but how are these 2 terms connected? what relationships do they have? So here the student said more mass equals stronger gravity. So that would be correct. So they knew that if something has more mass, it's going to have a stronger gravitational pull. And then, and again, this was not finished yet. These are just pictures that I took as I was walking around the classroom. I wish I had finished examples, but you know how that goes. I just had pictures as I was walking around. And so they're going to do this for all of these. So they're going to do it for mass and gravity. They're also going to do it for mass and weight, and then weight and gravity. So they are being forced to find the connections along all of those lines. So they can't get mixed up. Like if they were answering an open response question, they might be able to do the mass and gravity similarities or connections, but then totally forget about how mass and weight are connected. This graphic visual example makes them have to find all those connections. Now, in the middle, here's the thing. After they have done all of those connections, then they have to talk about how all three terms are connected in the middle. And I made sure that they knew the procedure for that. You have to do each side of your triangle before you can fill in the middle. And the thing that I loved about this in the classroom, and again, this looks super simple, and you're probably thinking like, well, that's just, they're just telling how things are similar and different. But when you see them collaborating and you put them into groups to do this, they start having arguments. Now, not like mean arguments and they're like hitting each other or anything, but they are starting to have little arguments about science. And that means they're engaged, because, you'd have a kid who was really trying to explain something and say, okay, mass and gravity are related because, as something gets bigger, it has more gravity. And then they'll find each other's misconceptions and explain things to each other. And so some of the things I loved hearing as we did this, because we were talking about space science in this, I would hear students saying, well, yeah, for example, Mercury is smaller than Earth. So if you're on Mercury, you're going to weigh less, but you'll have the same mass over here, and they're teaching each other. So the deeper learning that happens with the use of this tool, I just can't say enough good things about that. And I'm sure that it has a lot of applications, and I could see this in English language arts and math. I can see a lot of places where students have misconceptions and you have things that are related and different. So this could be used on all levels, all different content areas. As you can tell, I'm passionate about this because I really liked this tool.
All right, so, the learning process itself is a very active thing, but it's also incredibly important to look back on what you've learned or what you've worked on after you're done with the actual, product itself. And so the reflection tools that we have at our fingertips here, Effort Tracker and Personal Best, were the two that I found to have the most impact in my classroom this past year. And, even as a teacher, I feel like I could have filled out one of these forms and benefited from it. So I know, having felt that way, that my students definitely improved based on these two tools. And I use them two different ways. All right. So Effort Tracker was the first one that I tried in my own classroom. And there was a few reasons that I felt like that it really helped out with the learning process. And I even had a kid walk up to me after we filled this out the first time and just flat out say, I don't like what I had to write on the Effort Tracker form. Maybe next time it'll be different. And I was just like, well, I really hope so. That's why we did the Effort Tracker. So that first question up there is, how hard did I concentrate or try? And I really like that, because, it's the moment of truth for the kid. It's one thing to say out loud, okay, I probably didn't try very hard today. It is another thing entirely to have to take your pencil or pen and write that on this form. I don't think I tried very hard. And that might sound a little bit harsh, but, we all have that moment in our life where we have to be a little harsh with ourselves and say, like, I didn't do my best today. I'm going to do better tomorrow. And again, here, the same thought process. It is one thing to say you're going to do better tomorrow, and it's another entirely to have to come right here and write an explanation about why you didn't concentrate or try very hard. And maybe you're just having a bad day, but there's still value in acknowledging that.
And if I can interject, I just had a thought pop in that we didn't, practice or anything, but this is, I did use Effort Tracker as we did a project-based learning unit in 6th grade. And one thing that I was able to see is I did have some students, I taught 6th grade, and, for our smaller students, our younger students, this is a really good way to explicitly teach, some of those soft skills. And it's also a place to see where we might have some some growing to do, because I did have some students who would say, you know, oh, I tried very, very hard. And then I see what they got done on the task that day, and it's kind of falling behind. So that's a good opportunity to pull a student and have a conversation like, okay, let's talk about this. Let's self-reflect and let's see. And I could see even in younger grades, you know, this being an opportunity to maybe get some documentation in case you have a student who might need an IEP or a 504, because, you know, if they're trying so hard and they spend all their time and then they look at the work and see that it's not necessarily what they were asked to do, this would also be good documentation for that. But again, this is the whole point in this is making students independent learners, giving them those tools to self-reflect and be able to look at their own work and their own effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, effort tracker, I used primarily as a sort of group effort tracker. So, you know, number one, obviously, how hard did I concentrate or try? That's a very personal question for the kids. But when we got down to 2 and 3, how much time did I spend studying, practicing, or working on the assignment, or how carefully did I check and correct my work? You know, in an English classroom, we do a lot of writing. So a lot of the times when we use effort tracker, number 2 and number 3 would sort of be a group effort. So if I said, how much time did I spend studying, practicing, or working on an assignment, and the kid was like struggling a little bit, or the student was struggling trying to figure out where to put their bar, I might say, okay, well, you were here every day in class that we worked on your writing. That's at least a 5 by itself, right? Because you were in here with us, you were working on the assignment. Same thing down here with how carefully did I check and correct my work? Okay, well, you did the in-class activity to check your writing for mistakes. So that's at least a 5. So did you do anything outside of class? So, you know, you can kind of help them with some stepping stones if they're struggling to reflect a little bit. Now, this is a big one. Did I ask questions or request help if I was confused? You know, we're talking about those kind of soft skills a little bit, and having, I think, building the confidence to raise your hand and ask questions in class is for some students is difficult. So this spot down here can also just sort of help them, again, self-reflect and be like, okay, well, I didn't ask, and this is why. Maybe Mr. Hobbs and I need to talk about this one-on-one. And that's how I used this part of the form, was whenever possible, I would sit down with the student either at their desk or at my desk, and we would talk about, okay, why didn't you ask questions? Or, well, you did ask that question, I remember, so maybe why did you still make the mistake? Well, what needs to be different next time? So it was very much a group thing. Now, the next tool, reflecting on my personal best, I use this one more or less just individual with the kids. This is not something that we really stepped back and talked about together until after they'd already filled it out, with the exception of my goal for next time. And so I think I used this 3 times. And I think the first time that we had the kids do this, just to sort of introduce them to the idea of it, I told them to leave the goal for next time blank. And then after we had sort of a review what was on here, we set a goal together. But again, here, it's really important to sort of, if you have students that don't want to self-reflect, and, you know, in my classroom, I found that over the years, students are a little bit, you know, they're hesitant to self-reflect because, you know, I think we all do this sometimes. But the form helps them learn that that's not something to be afraid of. And like self-reflection and acknowledging that you have room to grow is part of being a human being and is a skill that you should be trying to develop anyway. And those 2 can help out with that tremendously.
Okay, so those were just an overview of our favorite tools that we used as teachers last year, and the ones that we were able to see successes with in deeper learning in our own classrooms. And so something that we noticed as deeper learning coaches is that, you know, we kind of wanted to share these tools. We got excited about, and hopefully you can see that we got excited about the type of learning that we saw and the changes we saw in our classroom by just using these simple, easy to use tools. So basically we found opportunities to share those successes with others, either on our team or on our floor, who, you know, maybe at the lunch table we're saying, hey, I'm having some issues with this. Well, guess what? We have something very simple to implement and very easy to use that pay off dividends in the long run. So we wanted to share a couple of different tools that were used by other teachers. So actually we made a list here of the ones that we did end up sharing with others. So these are ones that made it from our classrooms as deeper learning coaches to other teachers. Now we only have a couple of examples and we're running out of time, so we're going to do this really quickly. But this is a list of the ones that we did share with others in our district.
Yeah, and so Teamograph was, I think, the first one that as soon as I heard about the tool, I immediately knew a teacher that could benefit from it. And actually, when we were learning about the tool, I was texting him under the table and saying, I have this tool for you. And so, because he does a lot of project-based learning, and he does a lot of group work in his classroom. And the week before we learned about this tool, because he eats lunch with us, we were talking about it, and he was like, I'm having a lot of trouble getting the kids to sort of like help reflect on their classroom work and their group work in particular. And so Teamograph was wonderful for that. So this is the Teamograph organizer that I sent him. Okay. And so what he did was he took that and he adapted it for his own classroom, which is, again, one of the wonderful things about these tools is that they're so customizable for your classroom. And that's why it makes them, I think, so successful in the end. And so you can see what he did was he just took the original design, and then he basically turned it into a Google form. And so what that allowed him to do when the kid filled it out, he had that data on the back end. He could go back in and reflect on and look at, and he could say, okay, my groups need to be different next time. Or, well, if you've self-grouped yourself, like you look what the results of that were, maybe you make some different decisions next time and things like that. So it was a really quick implementation, and it was a very successful one.
Absolutely. And I actually did use this as well because we do a lot of PBL in our in sixth grade. And the one thing that I do want to say is, we hear about collaboration, having students collaborate. We hear about it with the deeper learning competencies. We hear about it in the tech standards, and a lot of the portraits of a graduate have collaborative learner in there with them. And, we can talk about that all day long, but how do we actually execute that? This is a perfect tool to give to teachers to say, well, here's how you can get started with that. And then you can see some places where you can help your students grow in that area.
Hi, educators. My name is Kinsey.
I'm going to pause that. Hold
right.
on. You want to introduce her?
Yes, so this is Kinsey Patton. She was one of our deeper learning coaches over the past year, and she's at a junior high level and teaches 7th grade math. So we're going to let Kinsey, we have a video here because she couldn't be here today. And so she's going to kind of explain a little bit about her experiences with these tools throughout the year.
Middle school math teacher. Deeper learning has drastically affected the way that I teach and the behaviors that I see in my classroom every day. I was blessed to start this journey learning through the Thoughtful Classroom, and I'm so glad that I was able to implement some of these little methods and tools throughout the past year, and I plan to do more this coming year. As a middle school math teacher, or this applies to any level, I'm sure, I have a harder time, or I want to make sure that I keep my students engaged. And I do like to teach with a group or a pair setup where students are interacting a lot. But sometimes that's hard to do. So that's a challenge for me, is to keep my instruction rigorous while still keeping that engagement high. But while we're doing that, I find myself redirecting and having questions on, can you clarify the directions for me, over and over and over. So as I learned some of the tools that are provided with deeper learning, one of those tools that was very effective was the 7-step directions. I learned that myself, and then I implemented that. The first time I showed it to my students, I just guided them through the process. We went through it together. What do you think this step means? What do you think this step means? And so we broke it down together on the concept of it. And then we started slowly implementing that and using those 7-step directions. I started out using it with like a small independent work activity that's something, 10 minutes or less that they could use it for. Here's the 7-step directions. You read it on your own and you figure out what I need to do, who's going to do it, when am I going to turn it in. And then I moved it from that small independent work activity into a station activity. So kind of a setup where students are going around to different areas of the classroom doing different tasks. And when they get to this one, they have a 7-step directions that they read. They understand what to do at this specific station, and then they move on to the next. So that kind of got them from going guided with me into on their own. And then we were able, by the end of the year, and this didn't take much, like probably 4 or 5 times of me implementing 7-step directions, and that we were able to do group activities and group tasks, assigning roles to each student with that 7-step direction. So everybody, regardless of their role, knew what their job was, what their partner's job was, what person three's job was. Like, everybody knew. So it was very effective in keeping me from repeating myself over and over. And also it laid all the directions out for every student. Another challenge that I see in my classroom is, from a teacher perspective, I want to use common, consistent language toward my students. I know math specifically is sometimes intimidating for middle school kids or at any age, but I want to use that common, consistent language that is, for all of my students. Another thing that I really strive to do is, we all know our standards as teachers. We know what we have to teach, but seeing those standards from different perspectives and what that mastery looks like of those standards from those different perspectives is huge. We have our own idea. Everybody has their own bias, whether we mean to or not. So seeing these standards from different perspectives is very important for us. A tool that I used to tackle that challenge for me was the learning window. And I'm a planner from way back. So the learning window for me allowed me as a teacher to see what mastery looked like different ways, so that my students can achieve those goals and hit those standards and hit those learning targets without doing this one cookie cutter assignment. The last challenge that I want to discuss today is, and I think that this is specific to math, but I'm sure it goes for every content level too, making connections from those specific math skills to broad concepts. I used the instructional tool called a study in, and this year I took one of my units and I made a study in. It was specifically for skill factor for 7th grade math, and I broadened that to make a connection to correspondence. And so it was called skill factor, a study in correspondence. And what I did from that is I took one of my whiteboards and I put the learning targets on there. I put all the terminology that we were going to learn. And then my students helped me create a list of terms and a list of connections for what they thought was correspondence. So it's broadening their knowledge of not just scale factor, but then it allows them to make connections to other terms that they might use in other subjects.
All right, so we are so happy that Kenzie found success in the use of those tools, and she is another one of the deeper learning coaches with us. And I remember her passion as she talked to us about the things that she had used in her classroom, and I was so impressed with the study in tool that she used, and I don't think I would have thought about that. But if you can see that really takes the math concepts and broadens their horizons with that, and brings even English language arts and everything into that. So we are very impressed with what she did with that. So just to cap up, we got 1 minute left. And we just want to talk about what we want to do with these tools now that we have experienced them from the teacher perspective. We've been trained on them with as deeper learning coaches. And, we are digital learning coaches now in our district. And we want to talk about, how are we going to take this knowledge about deeper learning and focus it this coming year. And so we have actually created a beginning of the year teacher survey that's really going to be super simple. We're going to have a targeted sharing of deeper learning tools. So we're going to explicitly, find teachers with certain challenges or certain needs and share those tools with them and actually teach them how to use them. Maybe do some co-teaching and some modeling in classrooms. We are actually now we're going to have the time and the capability to do some coaching and support with implementing those tools. And we are so excited about that. And then we're also wanting to collect some data based on teacher feedback to see which tools are effective and how we can use them and who else we might be able to share them with. And so this is a survey we're going to give out at the beginning of the school year, and it just has 2 questions. Number 1, look at the 4 areas below and select one you'd be interested in receiving resources or support in, and it has those 4 cornerstones of learning everything in there. And they only have to select one. And that is going to focus what types of research we do and how we're going to compile and distribute these deeper learning tools. Also, let us know if you have any additional classroom needs that you need resources for. So this is kind of doing our deeper learning coach and DLC job into one, digital learning coach. So we, and those 4 cornerstones are awesome because it doesn't matter what types of tools we're talking about, these simple pencil paper deeper learning tools or digital resources. I think that just looking at these 4 cornerstones is going to be helpful for us this year. We have also, we're going to have 2 elementary level deeper learning coaches, 2 middle level ones, and 2 high school teachers, in addition to ourselves, who will actually be the deeper learning coaches for the upcoming school year. So you have, 2 people in each level who are going to be able to be trained on these tools and be able to help us implement this process. They'll pilot, implement, and help share these. And then from there, we want to analyze the data from our teacher survey. We're going to meet with those coaches, and we just hope to see these awesome tools and this awesome way of learning pay off in our district. Does anybody have any questions with the 2 minutes we went over time?
We better check chat too, I guess, I'm sure.
And we haven't checked the chat yet. So I'm going to stop.
I've been watching it. I've been watching it for you.
Okay, thank you.
Some agreement with some of the tools and liking some of the things that you presented. Really liking the learning window that you shared. Utilizing some of the strategies like with the triangle that you were showing. And agreeing with the students argue over content, defending their ideas. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute or drop in the chat. Questions, the pencil paper resources, did they come from a book or are those files available somewhere?
So if your district is a deeper learning district and you've worked with a thoughtful classroom, I'm pretty sure you can get those files from somewhere there, but otherwise they're from a couple of workbooks. And if you were to just look up thoughtful classroom, you would find the workbooks. There's what, 3, I think, or 2 or 3. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. They're called tools. Tools for
learning, tools for assessment.
Yeah. There are several different books that they come from, but the company is the Thoughtful Classroom.
It's actually on the bottom of some of your slides. When we put it in there, we can, I noticed that you had those marked, so they can actually get the name of the book there. One is for assessment, and I can't remember the name. I have them here in my office somewhere. I'm just not putting my hand on it.
Thoughtful assessment, and yeah, Mr. Hobbs is looking for the book right now. He carries them everywhere you go. If you can see how much we like these tools.
Yeah, they are good.
He has them.
Okay, so the other one is tools for a successful class or for successful school year. That's the other one, and then tools for thoughtful assessment. And they're both absolutely wonderful books, and I really do carry them everywhere. They stay with me all the time.
We are not being paid by Thoughtful Classroom, by the way.
We
just like it that much. So
very practical tools, very, very much, very helpful.
The thing that we love about them is that they are things that you can literally implement that day in your classroom.
Yep.
And we see all these educational initiatives going along and all these wonderful things. And sometimes it's overwhelming and we're like, how do we execute that? This gives you easy to use that day tools to do that.
Yeah, they're wonderful.